Let's break down my favorite backup weapon in the game, the MP7. The MP7 was my first real airsoft gun, and ever since I got it, I started running it as a sidearm, with a G36 as my primary. I always had my G36 running as a longer range weapon, and that meant that I had a minimum engagement distance. So when enemies would get under it, I would have to swap to my MP7, and this is exactly how I used the MP7 in Warzone. And I couldn't ask for a better complement to a long range weapon, because the MP7 has great mobility, great TTK, and amazing recoil control. But don't let me just tell you about it, let me actually show you the stats. So let's get into the build. In this build, we have the monolithic suppressor to help with our bullet velocity and our range, the FSS strike barrel to increase again our bullet velocity and our range, but it does not hurt our mobility, a GI mini reflex, although you can use any red dot, the 60 round mags so that we have the maximum bullets in here, and the stippled grip tape to help with our ADS and sprint out times. This is an all-purpose build, it's good for up close and it's pretty good at medium range. It's not going to destroy anything at any of those ranges, but it will handle itself well and do its job. While you technically could easily engage targets past 40 meters, you'll have a hard time because SMGs have a FOV modifier that brings you to 90%. So if you're on affected and 100 plus FOV like I am on PC, well, you're going to have a hard time seeing your targets. If you're on console, you may find it easier, but at least on PC, I wouldn't push your luck. So let's get into the stats, starting with mobility. Its ADS is pretty great at 200 milliseconds, and its reload time is interesting because it doesn't matter if it's completely empty or you leave one bullet, it's still going to take you 1.95 seconds, which is pretty amazing that it has a sub 2 second reload time, even without sleight of hand. Its mag cap is 60, which is pretty great, but because its rate of fire is pretty fast, you'll burn through that really quickly. Its movement and sprint speeds though are pretty great, but if you're pairing it with a Cold War weapon, just check because the Cold War weapon may be a little bit faster. Its ADS strafe speed though is pretty good, it could be better, but it does work for an SMG. And its sprint out times are pretty great at 100 and 180 milliseconds. And its stability is pretty great at 1.5 T. Its velocity though is pretty great for an SMG at 800 meters per second. And its rate of fire is absolutely amazing at 15.83 rounds per second. And when we add up all the mobility points, we get a total of 46, which is one of the highest of all the weapons I've ever tested. Its recoil is a really easy pattern to control. It is actually one of the best recoil patterns in the entire game. Towards the end of the magazine, it gets a little bit harder to control and it starts turning a bit to the left, but you usually don't fire off an entire mag in one go. Because of this, it gets a recoil score of 37. Moving on to its damage, it technically has 4 damage ranges, but it doesn't actually affect the TTK, so I'm going to condense it to 3. Under 14 meters, your TTK is extremely competitive and becomes even greater when you start mixing in headshots. Just make sure not to hit any limb shots. Between 14 and 33 meters, its TTK isn't that great. But because it's so easy to control, if you're fighting another person with an SMG, you're probably going to win that fight because you'll be hitting all your shots. And after 33 meters, while it's not the greatest TTK in the world, it's actually not the worst either. So you can actually compete against many weapons, especially if you'll be hitting all those shots. So when we add up its values, it gets a damage score of 50.1. And then when we take all the categories, we get a final score of 133.1. This score puts it into category 2, which is really great for an SMG. It's not the only SMG to be in this category, but it does show how versatile this build is. So how do you use the MP7 and this build specifically? Because of its great mobility, you'll obviously want to run around the map with this thing. And that's one of the reasons that we chose the strike barrel instead of the recon. With its great mobility, you can easily traverse this map and be ready for any engagement. If you see any enemy under 50 meters, you don't have to swap to a different weapon. You just ADS and start firing. And because of its superior recoil, you'll be hitting every shot, and if they're running around just like you, they probably have their faster mobility weapon out, and knowing the Warzone community, it's probably one of the MP5s. So they definitely won't be able to properly deal with you, meaning they'll have to swap to their other weapon before they can engage. What are its flaws? Because if it was obviously perfect, then everyone would be running an MP7, and they're obviously not. So what are they? Let's say you turn a corner and you see someone with an MP5. Well, it's probably not going to end too well for you. Although, once you've gotten really used to this weapon, if you can get 2 headshots in with the rest of your shots, you can reduce the number of shots needed to down someone by 1, and you can keep going. But again, headshots are a lot harder to get when the target's moving and you guys are at point blank range, or when the target's further away and your zoom isn't that great. And this does mean that sometimes you're just gonna have to let a bounty go because you know that they're in this building, in the corner, camping with a shotgun. And while its mobility across the board is just amazing, its sprint speed isn't as great as many Cold War SMGs, and even some Cold War rifles. But remember, not everyone knows how to do slide canceling, and you may actually be a lot faster with an MP7 than someone who doesn't know what they're doing with a Cold War SMG. But do these things stop me from using the MP7 or the Holger even? No, because I know these weapons really well. I know my ADS times and my recoil patterns with them because I've just used them way too much. And because of that, I do have an advantage over someone who just picked up a meta weapon for their first time. Against an equally skilled player, things are a little bit different because then it's all about positioning and even flinch starts to kick in. But again, it's completely dependent on a bunch of outside factors, not just your build at that point. While the MP7 could be easily called a easy to use weapon, it is also hard to master because you do need to get those few headshots if you want to remain competitive against those meta weapons. While those meta weapons only have to shoot you in the chest, if you want to beat them, you're gonna have to be getting those headshots, and it's definitely possible. And this is why I love the MP7. It's an easy to use weapon that just pays off so well when you learn how to really use it. But that's the MP7. Have you ever tried to use the MP7, and did you figure out what happens when you mix in headshots? Let me know in the comments. If you have a favorite weapon you want me to do a stat guide on, or maybe a build of your own that you want me to rate, or if you have any topic, question, or idea that you want me to cover, let me know on here or on Instagram, and you may see it on the next Community Wednesday. But that's the video. If you enjoyed it or it's helped you in any way, let me know by leaving a like. If you got any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section down below, and if you want to make sure that you never miss another video, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.